The clues lie in the work of one of the greatest artists of all time, Leonardo da Vinci. He's left us thousands of scientific and engineering drawings showing plans for extraordinary machines. Helicopters, tanks, submarines, massive war engines. We're going to build a war machine that Leonardo offered to the Duke of Milan. It was one he certainly planned to construct, but it's never been built. It's an 80-foot crossbow that fires cannonballs. We'll also build Leonardo's ultimate dream, a flying machine. We'll construct it using traditional materials to understand the mind behind the machines. Was Leonardo an inspired engineer or just a prolific dreamer designing imaginary machines?
He wants to push things to the boundary to see what can be achieved, and that can be an enigmatic smile, but it might also be the super gun of its period.
He wanted to remake nature, to make something in his own terms, which was like, almost godlike.
But for all his fascination with flight, none of Leonardo's flying machines were ever built. A problem for our builders is that over the years, Leonardo's work has been lost, vandalized, possibly deliberately destroyed. We'll need experts who can trace and decipher the chaotic paper trail of his remaining archive. Our building teams will have 3 months to complete the 2 projects. Success will raise the question, why weren't they built in his lifetime? Were Leonardo's ideas too dangerous for the world he lived in? By building these machines for the first time, we hope to find the answers. In 1485, Leonardo wanted to impress the Duke of Milan, and he needed something colossal. The giant crossbow is 80 foot wide, 50 foot long, and takes 10 tons of force to pull back. His blueprint will need translating into plans that 21st century craftsmen can understand. That's Ivan Williams' job. He's a design engineer with 20 years' experience making ancient weapons. But the scale and complexity of this machine is giving Ivan his biggest headache to date.
I've got a lot of worries about the drawings that are there. I think maybe that's why it wasn't built, because the artisans that knew him would say to him, look, Leo, you know, I know you're intrigued with this and the guy's paying a lot of money, but really, you know, you'll screw yourself. If you make this, you'll make a prat of yourself, because it won't work very well.
But the builders have to make it work, and that could be dangerous.
We're putting a huge amount of force into that bow. We wind this thing back, we get it up to 6.5 tons, something fails catastrophically, and it just throws bits of wood and metal all over the place. So, not injuring people is of prime importance with this. The second prime importance is that it throws a large rock a long distance.
For now, the woodyard stands idle. The team can't start until the design issues are resolved. They've had to call in an expert from Florence, famous for his work on the artist-engineers of the Renaissance. He's Paolo Galluzzi. Director of the Science Museum in Florence, Paolo is a world authority on building Leonardo's machines. He knows the problems facing the team.
This is the fantastic world of Leonardo. You have to look for hints and form a glimpse of the development of the idea in the Leonardo mind. He's a visionary. He's never simply accepting ordinary solutions. He wants to improve, and sometimes this is the weak point of his ideas. He wants to improve at any cost, even if he's raising or risking to enter the world of impossibility.
Has Leonardo entered the world of impossibility with his giant crossbow, or is Ivan being too cautious? Paolo is joining the team in Wiltshire to help resolve their differences. Dave Hepworth, team leader, will chair the meeting, but Ivan has set the agenda.
Well,
Let's see.
I might sound very negative with some of the things I'm about to say, but looking at all the problems that will occur, you know, if you list them down, there are many. The trigger mechanism. In my opinion, in this application, it won't work. Pressure on that nut would just rip straight out as it is. The whole thing was smashed. And there's no need for that because the word trigger mechanisms at the time designed for this particular type of machine.
Well, as a watchdog of Leonardo's documents, I'm playing this role today. I would say that I would be pretty hesitant to abandon this trigger mechanism. As he says in a letter to the Duke of Milan offering his services, I will make machines out of the tradition. This is typical of Leonardo, is introducing innovation.
Right.
But there were trigger mechanisms around that he would have seen, and I'm sure the armors would have said to him, let's go for the one the Romans have used, proved dead simple, holds the string completely, you can't pop over the top.
Sure. And how do you interpret these design?
I'll try to copy it in a similar sort of way, but that's the weak point, that's where the bow will start to crack.
Paolo's reluctantly agreed to Ivan's replacement trigger, but the builders are pressing for 2 more changes. Because they're convinced Leonardo's bow will crack under tension, they want to slim it down to make it more flexible. Secondly, they insist the size of the entire crossbow is inefficient. Dave's computer model suggests that it will work just as well 30 foot shorter. Paolo accepts Renaissance builders may have made the same adjustments, but he won't permit any further changes.
Paolo's really keen that we follow the original Leonardo design. But I think it's ridiculously huge. I mean, come on, 80 feet is silly. We've got to go for something more like 50 feet. But I'm sure that is exactly how it would have worked in Leonardo's day. They would have gone along, they would have changed things as they'd made it, and that is exactly what we need to do. We need to make this a learning experience, not just follow this design, build it exactly as it is. Yeah, it was an experiment. That's what we're doing. We're doing an experiment. And I think it's still in the spirit of the Leonardo project.
Team leader Dave Hepworth is a structural engineer and expert bowmaker. Dave claims that at 50 feet, this machine will still be 5 times bigger than any crossbow ever built. It's truly a giant, designed for a giant. Ludovico Sforza, the warlord of Milan. Leonardo was his court engineer and lived in Sforza's palaces. He'd come a long way from his humble beginnings. Leonardo was born in the village of Vinci. Because he was illegitimate, the son of a lawyer and a peasant girl, the higher professions were closed to him. Instead, he got the basic education reserved for artisans. But Leonardo knew that he was destined for better things.
There is that very interesting story, which is one of the few personal things in his notebooks about lying in his crib and a bird came down and touched his lips with its tail. What for Leonardo it meant was that he was predestined to think about flight. This is my destiny, he effectively says about this vision. So the bird has come from the air and touched him, as it were, with his magic.
Our second project is to make Leonardo's dream of flight come true. Steve Roberts and Martin Kim have that job. They're world famous for recreating the milestone machines of aviation history. But their knowledge will be of little use when attempting to build a machine that predates flight by 400 years. They begin by eliminating the impossible. Many of Leonardo's early designs are weird man-powered machines which can't be made to fly. In his later work, based on his studies of birds, Leonardo had moved on to gliding flight. While searching through these designs, Steve and Martin notice a wing shape that Leonardo draws time and again.
This is nice. The only trouble, if we go down that road, I think we're not going to be very stable.
No, it's, well, yeah, I mean, this is a better shape, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, but even that, I think you're still going to need a tail.
Do you think so?
For something that's so flat.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a tail here which is in his back drawing, really. As long as Leonardo's ideas and the concepts there, I think it would be fair to do.
So I was saying we'll go with this one. We can take the tail off of that.
Yeah, that's agreed then. So if we go for a tail, and that shape as well, really.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
That's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Steve and Martin plan to build this. It combines the tail from one Leonardo drawing with the most common wing shape among his designs.
I think we'll have to make another one. Go into production, I think.
They're building a scale model that relies entirely on the wooden frame and spars for rigidity.
It'll be quite a spectacular joint, isn't it?
There are no bracing cables for support, and it's exactly what Leonardo drew. The model has a 5-foot wingspan. The full-scale glider will be 30 foot. Unlike the crossbow team, Steve and Martin are not going to deviate from this 500-year-old design, even though they're not sure if it'll fly.
It might be worth a trip to Old Warden down the grass. Nice gentle slopes.
The first attempt isn't bad, but perhaps the glider is too heavy. They've made it from linen, cane and poplar. The hope is Leonardo could have used a lighter wood, like Steve's favourite, spruce. There's only one way to find out. Steve will go to Florence to hunt for Renaissance materials, and Dave Hepworth is going with him.
Okay.
There's not much point testing a miniature giant crossbow. Only the full-scale machine can reveal how the parts will stand up to the colossal stresses, but at least the trigger works well. Now both teams have to find authentic materials that are right for the job. It's essential if Dave and Steve are to build machines that, for the last 500 years, have only ever existed on paper. Renaissance Florence, 1469. Leonardo began his artist apprenticeship here in the workshop of the painter and engineer Andrea Verrocchio. He was in luck. He was about to be trained in Europe's most technically advanced studio in a city that was the hub of an artistic and technological revolution. Paolo Galuzzi is a world authority on the artist-engineers who inspired Leonardo. They were a new breed of craftsmen, unlike any before them or since.
We have to be aware that an artist of the 15th century, of the Leonardo generation, is not any way similar to what we intend today for an artist. He's a worker, he's a producer, he's a builder at the same time. He's also an artist.
The great dome of Florence Cathedral is the crowning glory of this breed of artist-engineers. A feat of engineering genius, it was an inspiration for the young Leonardo when he first arrived in Florence. The dome was designed by the artist and engineer Filippo Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi broke with traditional methods and calculated mathematically how to construct the dome without using a wooden frame for internal support. But he had to invent cranes, hoists and scaffolding to put the pieces into place. Paolo has brought Dave and Steve to the monument they said could never be made. As Verrocchio's apprentice, Leonardo got to work on the dome. It taught him that to be a great artist, you had to be a great engineer. And artist-engineers could turn impossible dreams into reality. Brunelleschi used mathematics to solve the riddle of the dome. Leonardo drew his inspiration from nature. The natural world features at the center of the Annunciation, painted by Leonardo at the age of only 21. It not only reveals his talent for representing nature, but also his urge to understand how it works.
We know that Leonardo was accomplished as a naturalist, very scientific, very progressive, whereas the idea of the artist has been filled with mystique and mystery. And today we have these different fields of knowledge like science and engineering and art and painting. And back when Leonardo lived, they weren't all separated out. When Leonardo put his knowledge of the dynamics of water into the background of his paintings as an image, those were things that went hand in hand in a way that they don't today.
Nobody drew nature better than Leonardo. It moves, it stirs, it has an enormous sense of inner life, not just looking at the surface of nature, but he penetrates into what makes nature work, how its energies express itself in the air, in the movement of plants, and the movement of water.
With his grasp of nature and the science he learned as an artist-engineer, Leonardo began to explore some very grand ideas. The most audacious was that man could fly. He believed in the power of machines to change man's destiny. Our builders have to bring two of Leonardo's grandest designs to life. But they must use traditional materials. Florence still has workshops practicing the technology of Leonardo's day. Paolo has brought Steve and Martin to meet Fabio Rossi, a specialist in the restoration of Renaissance timbers.
Yeah, we've got some specific questions about wood that we need answering. On one side of the bow we need a hard wood that can stand compression.
Legno capace di essere compresso.
Un legno compresso può essere l'olmo o il noce, tipo un legno è flessibile.
This is hard and flexible. This is walnut, but also the elm would be appropriate. Maybe the elm even better. But he would recommend elm or walnut.
And what about a flexible, stretchable wood for the outside of the bow? What would he use for that?
Yeah, and per la parte esterna delle braccia, perché le braccia sono...
Dave believes he can make a more powerful bow by combining timbers that have different properties.
What would you recommend?
Pioppo sicuramente sarà flessibile, anche se leggero, però è
It's much lighter, but it's very flexible.
For Dave's purposes, Fabio's offered several woods Leonardo could have used. And poplar also has possibilities for Steve's glider.
Yes, this is certainly the lightest wood, and this was my first option. But I've explored this, and I like the weight, it's good, but I need something a bit stronger.
Qualcosa di leggero e flessibile per l'aliante potrebbe essere il pioppo.
Sì, ancora
He still insists that for a glider the poplar would be
the best option.
In his idea, what they might have used is still the best option.
Although the builders are getting good practical advice, there is a problem. Leonardo's restless mind often drove him from one project to the next before he'd fleshed out the details in his drawings. And he thought nothing of leaving his work unfinished if a fresh challenge caught his eye.
The story of Leonardo's Florentine work is rather puzzling in some ways. He has very prestigious commissions. One is for the Council Hall of Florence. Now, there cannot be a more prestigious one than that, and any career artist would know that getting that done on time would make his career, and he didn't finish it. And the other is this big altarpiece for a monastery outside Florence, again unfinished. And this suggests there is a problem.
He was obviously brilliant, I mean, there's no question about that, and the mind was always working. But at some point, he needed to stop coming up with the big ideas and sit and work with the ordinary nuts and bolts, and he very seldom actually did that.
While Dave and Steve are in Florence, Ivan's been cracking on with the metalwork for the giant crossbow, and he hasn't found any problems with the nuts and bolts yet. In Telford, they'll forge the trigger mechanism and the brackets holding the giant wooden structure together. It will need 10 tons of iron. With research and development now complete, the crossbow team have 9 weeks to build their machine. And with the metalwork underway, they have a head start over the glider team. Steve and Martin are still running tests. They're simulating air pressure on the wing with sandbags. They've taken Fabio's advice and are using black poplar for the frame. The spruce Steve wanted wasn't known to Leonardo. Leather will bind the wing ribs, which are made of cane. The glider has to be as light as possible, and it is, weighing in at 70 pounds. But the linen for the wing will add another 10. To weatherproof the linen, they're trying out some Renaissance recipes.
Yeah, great. 2 seaweeds, shellac,
starch.
Starch.
Yeah, I like the shellac because I think it's a form of varnish, and they.
Yeah, I've got a problem with that though.
What's your problem with that?
It's just the colour, really.
Now that they've started building, Steve and Martin have a better chance of assessing the flight potential of Leonardo's glider, and they're not seeing eye to eye.
If it flies wonderfully, that would do just fine. You can look at it and say Leonardo would have flown years ago if he'd put his mind to it. And to be quite honest, I think he'd have run out of money trying before it worked. Because I think he'd have crashed a lot of gliders before he got one that actually worked.
Realistically, if it produces lift, controllable, leaves the ground and safely and comes back down to the ground, I shall be absolutely elated. But I would love to see it go that extra bit, actually, just a bit more,
Yeah, Steve is clearly the more optimistic of the two of us, and he gets very excited and very carried away, and he tends to promise the Earth. We'll see if we can deliver that.
Steve and Martin are concerned because Leonardo's wing lacks an aerofoil shape. The leading edge found in modern aircraft divides airflow around the wing in a way that reduces pressure over the top surface, and this is what produces lift. Without this leading edge, Leonardo's wing may never get off the ground. The sheer scale of the crossbow project means that their problems are mostly structural. The carriage is 45 foot long and weighs 10 tons. For the bow limb, Dave's decided to combine elm with hickory. He's taken a small liberty because hickory was only available 60 years after Leonardo's death. However, it is a traditional wood for making bows. But the team are puzzled. Why was an artist designing a weapon of war in the first place?
We know him as an artist, but obviously he's also a scientist, and he's really interested in what is the latest technology. And for much of this period, the latest technology is weapons, methods of warfare that have never been used before, or perhaps adaptations of older methods of warfare that only he can see the potential of.
This is the great enigma. Why did Leonardo, a man famous for innovation, base his design on an ancient weapon, the crossbow, when the weapon of choice was the cannon? Leonardo knew that gunpowder was highly unstable and often killed the gunners. Cannon couldn't be relied upon for range or accuracy because of the problem of recoil. After each firing, it had to be repositioned and re-aimed. Could the giant crossbow actually have been a better weapon?
If the giant crossbow can be made to work, it would have given a greater range than many of the cannon available at the time. It would have been smokeless, which meant you could observe the target. And of course it would be very, very efficient. And unlike cannon, which are shooting relatively in random, it's very likely it'll remain in the same position, so every shot that you fire will land in roughly the same sort of area. So in those terms, it really is a very, very much better weapon.
That's the expert's view, but what do the men actually building the crossbow think?
It's not so much what I think it'll do, is what it has to do to make us happy. If this thing doesn't throw 100 yards, we're not going to be happy. So we're looking for in excess of 100 yards, and we'd like in excess of 200 yards.
The main sort of concept is there, but you start to look at the smaller details and think, well, if I did that and did that, that would work then. So you not only look at it, you start to redesign it to make it work, because it wouldn't have worked as the drawing showed. But when you do see it, it's a real eureka moment.
I can say, you know, I've done some computer models. In theory, it should fire 300 yards. Fine, I can say that to you now. But it might not fire 300 yards because it depends how well we build it. This thing is a huge construction, you know, the size of a house, and a lot of that knowledge on how wood works in a big dynamic structure is just not available. Well, it's no longer available. So as long as we can learn something from this, then I'll be happy with that. But I'd like the damn thing to fire as well.
With the giant crossbow, Leonardo was trying to build a precision weapon of war that would beat the cannon of the day. Searching for a model of precision from nature on which to base his giant crossbow, Leonardo focused on the human body. At Ruskin College, Oxford, Sarah Simblett teaches anatomy to artists, and Leonardo's remarkably accurate studies of muscles are her teaching aids. Sarah's convinced there's evidence that Leonardo directly transferred the mechanics of the human body into designs for machines.
Now, it's particularly interesting in this series of drawings that we have here and in our study of the shoulder girdle to have a look at the way that he's treated the pectoralis major muscle. He's reduced the fibres of the muscle to cords. It's almost as if you're kind of creating a rigging on the bones. I mean, this is a technique he also carried straight across into his engineering, you know, when he's building crossbows and other great machines. Now, let's have a look at the muscle in detail. Okay, Leonardo is looking at the body as an artist and as an engineer. Other artists, they were really concerned with the surface structure. Leonardo takes it much further. He's interested in anatomy as a subject in itself. He's interested in the engineering of the body. So, for example, in his construction of the magnificent crossbow, we see a direct relationship between the tension of the wood and the tension of bone. It is covered almost quite literally with muscles and sinews that operate that invention.
It's human anatomy that inspired the giant crossbow, but a simple human error has put the project in jeopardy. Amazingly, Ivan's plans are in feet and inches, but some components have been ordered by the meter. Things don't fit, and tempers are starting to fray.
These big bolts here, they're just slightly too short, and the metal axle support's slightly too long.
I think they're the right length. I think the axle is too small.
Well, OK, right, there's a bit of an issue there then.
Well, I'll do that originally at a foot, and I really think it needs a foot. OK,
in terms of what?
Just the weight of this.
There's no way that steel would have to bend for the wood to fracture. There's no way that's going to happen.
OK. And you were sort of worried about how this has come about, and I think that there are some discrepancies or whatever.
We're working to inches and millimetres.
Well, the slight, yeah. I mean, the problem is these drawings have been done at different times, and they haven't necessarily all
come together.
Right. The prod is the critical part of this. The bow limbs that stick out at the front.
Right.
The bits that are doing all the bending. If they don't store the energy well enough, or if they split, or the laminations fail, then it's not going to work.
The bow limb is laminated, meaning it's two woods glued together. The elm can stand greater compression, and the hickory has good elastic properties. This combination should compensate for the power lost in slimming down Leonardo's original design. They knew about laminations in Leonardo's day, but creating a strong bond between the layers of wood is a complex process. It's causing big headaches. For the glider, precision is vital. Steve and Martin are individually responsible for thousands of parts, and these must fit together exactly if the machine is to fly. But there's a crucial component on the way that they haven't yet got the measure of, because up till now, no suitable pilot's been found who'll risk their neck flying this glider. Judy Ledden has agreed to be our pilot. She's 3 times world hang gliding champion, but it'll still be 8 weeks before there's a glider for her to fly. Judy's flying into the construction yard to meet Steve and Martin for the first time. Now they'll have to deal with the human element of this project, the risks facing Judy in her most dangerous challenge to date.
Feels like it wants to fly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In this breeze that's blowing up now, you can feel the strain on it. Hear it, actually, it's creaking. The things that disturb me are when the nose comes up and it stalls, it just automatically seems to nose dive, which the thought of that is a bit uncomfortable to me, obviously.
I think the trouble we've got is actually trying to find where to actually hang you, so you have got that control the first time up.
I mean, the old hang glide had very tiny A-frames, very small.
It's all well and good to say use an A-frame, but we haven't got any evidence of an A-frame.
What have we got evidence of?
Very little.
Absolutely nothing.
No, we've got very little, but there is good evidence of a harness being attached here, but this is the point you would like to be hung from.
I mean, I'm not bothered about harness comfort, but if I'm to commit my neck underneath it, I'd like some control.
As a modern hang glider?
The only form that I know is weight shift.
If we hang just an A-frame straight onto this now, then people are going to say that you've just built a hang glider. Up until now, we've built a Leonardo.
I need control. That's fundamental to me.
You've got to have control. Steve. If you don't have control, then you're going to hurt someone badly.
I'm not saying to have control. I'm just saying to go to a modern hang glider concept is probably premature.
So what are you going to put on there?
I don't honestly know.
In 1482, Leonardo moved to Milan to further his ambitions. Aged 30, he found the city every bit the rival to Florence. Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, was attracting the most talented artists, engineers and thinkers of the time to his court.
Lots of scholars were moving to Milan, and Leonardo will find, for instance, a fantastic companion in Milan, Luca Pacioli. And Luca Pacioli was a great mathematician and introduced Leonardo to Euclid. Leonardo didn't know anything about geometry when he moved to Milan, and Luca Pacioli and other scholars, Marcantonio della Torre for anatomy, Giorgio Valla for the classic knowledge, were very important for him during his Milan stay.
In Milan, Leonardo began to study, began to write, began to change his idea of the artist, and more and more he was involved in theoretical discussions, for example.
But this wasn't the theory Leonardo knew from his time in Florence. The artists' studios may have been the science labs of their day, but in the realm of philosophy, artists, and particularly painters, had been excluded. Leonardo would be the first to break through to this world.
He went immediately to the center of the problem, which is the causes, which is the reasons of the life, le ragioni della vita, che cosa è anima e che cosa è moto.
The causes of life and death would preoccupy Leonardo for the rest of his life. But he broke with the orthodox explanations of the time that held this to be solely the will of God. Leonardo was investigating physical, mechanical causes. He'd gone from using man as a source of inspiration for his machines to actually seeing man as a machine. These were dangerous waters.
I think that Leonardo was put in a dangerous position by his voracious interest in the structure of the human body and in all that this implied for the workings of nature. So I think the notion that the body has an autonomous functioning system, that it is independent of divine action, that was dangerous.
The church controlled the institutions permitted to practice anatomy. Leonardo dissected corpses in secret.
Leonardo worked privately, outside of any institution, to dissect. There would have been no chemicals to preserve the body, and he talks in his notes about his horror of the night hours spent in the company of these corpses. He also tells us about how he was obstructed by blood, so that he couldn't really tell the difference between different materials that he was looking at inside the body. And he was having a problem with connective tissue, which he describes as membranes, and there being membranes everywhere. And so it was quite hard for Leonardo to develop his knowledge of anatomy from the body. I mean, what he came up with was really remarkable, miraculous in many ways.
But what he came up with was also blasphemous. He believed that scientific observation, not religious dogma, should dictate how the world was interpreted. Leonardo had taken an heretical and dangerous path. His studies were leading him to a startling conclusion, that God's divine creation, man, was a machine, and like all machines, capable of improvement. Our team are convinced that Leonardo's design is also capable of improvement, and after 2.5 months of arduous work, it's time to see if they're right. The big test will be to see how the bow limbs stand up under pressure. These are the muscles and tendons of the machine, the most critical components of all.
Tell me when we got to where we got to before.
Hang on just a second, let me mark it.
This is the make or break moment for the laminates that have taken over a month to prepare.
Now you're halfway on the silver mark.
A little bit more. Whoa, 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 whoa.
It's nothing short of a disaster. Could a 15th century design have defeated 21st century know-how?
I think we've got this is opening up, this laminate. And I think some of these glue lines might be going. worst thing possible has happened. And I just know that when we bend it, those cracks are going to get worse and the things are going to snap. Oh, it's really, really frustrating because I know we could do this thing. I know we can make it. But it's just that we haven't got the skills. We've lost those skills that they had in those days to be able to build these damn things. And we just, you know, it's really frustrating because we're almost sort of in grasping distance and it's slipping out of our grasp because we can't build it as well as we need to make this thing work.
That is outrageous.
I mean, that is just utterly
we can't use
useless.
It's not looking terribly clever, is it?
It's rubbish.
What's plan C then, boss?
Plan C. Plan E we're on now, I think.
Okay.
The team are at a new low, because in 14 days' time the crossbow must be ready to fire, and the wood to make the new bow limbs has been badly machined. In fact, it's useless, and this was the last batch of hickory in the country.
Not quite going to plan.
Nah. It's Friday, it's 3 o'clock, and we've got to have it done tonight. We better get on with it.
Yeah.
Dave's plan E is to salvage what they can from the wood they have, until he comes up with plan F, whatever that is. But even some of Leonardo's best-laid plans came to grief.
He planned aqueducts or other kinds of canal projects. He planned buildings. He planned urban systems. He planned ways of casting that no one had ever seen before. Now, Leonardo pushed the boundaries of technologies, and there is both a joy and a curse to that.
In the 1490s, Leonardo was tackling two colossal projects at the same time. The first was a statue 24 foot high. The Duke of Milan's horse would require an ingenious method of casting in bronze. The second was the Last Supper, a massive fresco for which he devised a new technique for painting on plaster. But in 1499, catastrophe struck. The French army ousted the Duke of Milan. They destroyed Leonardo's giant clay horse. His masterpiece, The Last Supper, began to deteriorate soon after Leonardo fled the city. As a military engineer, sculptor and painter, he tasted bitter disappointment. But none of this thwarted Leonardo's ambition. He continued to pursue his dream of flight. Searching the 7,000 pages of his notebooks, our glider team have missed a vital clue for achieving that dream. Martin Kemp has spent his life searching for clues among Leonardo's drawings. His expertise is now crucial to Steve and Martin. Their pilot, Judy, refuses to fly unless they can give her control of the glider. It's now critical that they find a Leonardo design for a pilot frame.
I think your major concern is safety, isn't it?
Yeah,
Particularly
the main problem that I think we've got is control. We must have some form of control if we're going to ask someone to actually fly it.
Where I would resist as keeper of the historical conscience is if you introduce a system which is based upon later aeronautics that he couldn't have handled.
Yeah. Well, we've hit some sort of wall with an O-frame as such, but so what do you think we are allowed to do?
If you think of this drawing with the centre of gravity, if you think he's working with a frame, the A-frame, so-called, is a reasonable extrapolation from that. So it's within the right territory, even if he didn't invent it. So I'd be happier if this frame worked, but if it doesn't work, then we've got... It's not a wall, it's a kind of elastic boundary.
All right, so if the worst comes to the worst,
I'll tell you when you hit a wall.
This tiny sketch is ingenious. It shows that Leonardo understood the principles of modern hang gliding control. Shifting the pilot's weight alters the direction of the glider.
that's been very, very encouraging.
It's absolutely terrific, because one of the things Leonardo is trying to do is to invent something like nature. Not to look literally like a bird, but to have the feeling of a natural design. And that does that absolutely terrifically. I think it's great. I mean, this in a way is the Mona Lisa of engineering. This is terrifically exciting. So we're in a sense doing we're doing the Mona Lisa of engineering.
Well,
it is good.
I'm glad you're quite pleased so far. It's encouraging anyway. It's good for us.
The giant crossbow is finally leaving its Wiltshire home. It's taken nearly 11 weeks to build, and the team are confident that everything fits together perfectly. Arriving at the test site, there is one nagging worry. They haven't had time to test the new bow limbs salvaged from what was left of the hickory. They only just managed to finish them in 2 weeks. The Army used Salisbury Plain to test their big guns. It's the ideal place for the field trials of Leonardo's supergun. Dwarfing 21st century artillery, the giant crossbow requires a lot of manpower to prepare for firing.
You know, it's taking wood to its absolute limits. Look at the size of those things. It's just amazing, the forces in it, and I think it just shows the sort of ambition that Leonardo had. He was obsessed with taking things to the extreme, and you can't get any more extreme than that. He must have been nuts, actually.
Paolo Galuzzi's arrived from Florence for the big moment, but neither he nor the Army are allowed within 40 yards of this monster because, when fully drawn, it could explode. A motor has to do the job of drawing back the bow. It's an awesome sight that's even impressed the top brass.
It's the size of it that is just, it does take your breath away.
Well, I think they were, you know, we've got the theory that they were hoping that you just wheeled it out and
I
the
reckon
enemy, they all ran away.
If there was a sort of pile of pikemen coming at you and they saw this about to
they might well think twice.
They would probably say, no, had enough of that. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, the fear factor.
Yeah.
Okay, take the strain gently.
Dave has a microphone attached to the bow, and he's listening for the sound he fears most of all. Cracking wood. The team are relieved. The bow works. But the shot is poor, only 25 yards.
A valid point, isn't it?
Okay.
Balls.
All balls.
The good humour evaporates when the cannonball barely leaves the crossbow.
The hell stretch this time?
My patience.
These knots are loose.
And then, to cap it all, the weather turns ugly. And it's not long before spirits are sinking under a relentless downpour. The problem is that the sling is failing to release the ball cleanly when it reaches the end of the launch ramp. Reviewing their last disaster, the team seem to think they've found a solution.
The ramp is actually looking good.
Yeah.
But we've got to then stop the pouch and the ropes.
Yeah, we've got to stop
to allow
them
the
before,
ball to be dispatched.
We've got to stop them before they clash into this and waste half of their energy on the boat itself.
The way they're going to solve the problem is by fixing 2 upright posts in front of the ramps so that the sling stops dead and flings the ball forward. But the rain and the failing light are threatening to stop play.
Like some form of torture, this, isn't it?
Leonardo's war machine failed to fire the ball past 50 yards, and the rope, sodden with rain, lost its tension. There's time for one last go, but it is disappointing.
I mean, the thing, just look at it. It is a monster, isn't it? And a flipping scary monster all the time. I've been shaking in my boots. I might not have been showing it, but I've been absolutely scared witless drawing that thing back. Because I know in my mind the forces are horrendous. They're massive forces. And getting those limbs back, you know, we thought those limbs are going to break halfway down. They didn't. The whole thing held together.
One of the last to leave the site is the man who warned the team about tampering with Leonardo's design, Paolo Galuzzi.
We would always dream of having Leonardo himself to give a look to what we did and say, rubbish, I would have done much better. But we are to be prepared to follow the process until an end, as in an adventure, real adventure.
I mean, it's tempting to say, it's tempting to just, you know, say, we throw the thing in the bin. Sorry.
Oh, whatever.
I mean, I've been thinking about this sort of all night, really, and I think it's back to the drawing board on the bow limbs. But the drawing board has to be Leonardo, because we're getting too far away from Leonardo's design, I think. I'm just trying to sort of think back how we how we got to this point. And I think what's happened is we were too confident at the beginning, because we looked at Leonardo's drawing and said, nope, this won't work. We could build it a lot better than that. We went down that route and now we found we were wrong. We can't build it better, because it is just putting these... we've got too complicated again, too complicated, and we've been too much influenced by current engineering theory.